Hi, I'm Sean Kadim, Seekonk Town Administrator, and we're here today to discuss the Seekonk Special Town Meeting preview. I'm joined with two special guests here, Mike Durkee, who is, you are very special, Mike Durkee, who is the Board of Library Trustees Chairperson, and Kate Hibbert, who is the Director of the Library. The special town meeting will be taking place on October 24th at 7 p.m. at the Seekonk High School, and we will be discussing the library building project. This is a project that's been ongoing for about 8.5 years, or a little bit more. I know when I first came on as the town administrator in Seekonk back in 2014, one of my very first meetings was I forget exactly what it was, but a community meeting to get input about the library. And that truly was, I think, my first official community meeting, which was held in the library back in 2014. So we've come a long way. So as we always do with these previews for a town meeting, we want to give you the opportunity to hear the facts and really kind of dispel some either rumors or misinformations that's been put out there, and really kind of discuss the project itself so that the voters at town meeting are educated and can make an educated decision on whether or not they support a library building project. So Mike, Kate, I'll ask you a couple of questions, so whoever wants to jump in and answer the questions would go right ahead. So I figured we'd go into general library project questions, and then we'll go into maybe some library statistics, and then address some misinformation that I think has been out there to hopefully clarify some of the information that we have. So I think we'll start with a general question. Why a new library and why now?
Our general need is space, and the space was needed 20 years ago, if you recall, and well, you and I weren't here then, but in 2000, there was an application for a grant back then for a new library. And unfortunately, that one was defeated, but at the time, in 2000, the library was deemed too small for the community needs. So fast forward 20 years, the building that we're in now was built in the 1970s. So it's based on 1970s population data, and there's been a 26% increase in population in Seekonk since then. Add to that changes in library services, changes in community needs. We don't have dedicated space for our teens in this community, and the library is ideally located for that, between the middle school and one of the elementary schools and not far from the high school. We have one meeting room, which is in constant use. We have no children's programming space, and one of the bigger needs that we've seen, all libraries have seen really over the past 5 to 10 years, is a need for quiet study space or small group study space. We see tutors every afternoon and all day during the summer. We have small business folks who come to use the library. And once we reopened after COVID, we see a lot of people wanting space for virtual job interviews, a quiet space, because that's tough to do in your home. So can you take us through the process on how we came about? And I talked a little earlier about my first community meeting was sitting in and getting the feedback from the community as to what they wanted to see in the library. When did it really start, and how did we start this process, and how did we get to the point we are now?
Well, I think the important thing to put out first with regard to the project is that the project is a community project. It's for the library, but we made sure that a building committee, a study committee, a needs assessment committee was put together that was comprised of a number of Seekonk residents, not just library supporters. We opened it up to everyone, and we had people join that committee, and that started back in late 2012. And the result of that was a study of the building itself as it currently exists, the needs as they defined it, the users defined it, and out of that study came a proposal for the new building. Part of that proposal was looking at other existing building sites in town. So I know there has been some discussion about, well, did you look here, did you look there? And yes, the people did. Everything was looked at, and was decided that that was the best spot for it to be because, as Kate mentioned earlier, it's proximate to so many of the schools, but it's also almost the geographical center of the town. And the way the process works with Massachusetts library funding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kate, you submit a grant application. First, there's a preliminary study, and then you have to put in a significant, and you can see it on the table perhaps, pretty thick book of that supports all of the requirement.
All the studies and,
Right.
And that was submitted to the state
7 copies
library.
of this, because I actually drove this to Boston. That was my introduction to Seekonk.
And again, and I hate to be repetitious, but to go back, we supplied this to the town because the grant application had to be signed by the selectmen. It wasn't signed by the Board of Library Trustees. So there was buy-in from the town, from the top levels down to the people who actually utilize the library on a daily basis. And then it sits. And we were awarded a provisional grant, but we were initially in 14th?
I want to say 14th.
14th place. And so what happens is those funds, as they are authorized and appropriated on an annual basis, resulted in Seekonk moving up. During COVID, there were a few libraries that dropped out. I think even before that, there probably were a couple. And so then we ended up in the grant, the actual grant round and the grant appropriation this year. And so July 7th, July 9th, we received notification that we got the grant of $7.3 million.
And I believe it was, and I could be wrong because COVID has skewed my timeline, but it was probably pre-COVID that we were at town meeting, asking town meeting to support the submittal of the grant application.
Yeah,
Right?
that was
Absolutely.
actually my first town meeting here, and that was November 2016. So
Okay. So it was earlier than, okay.
the town voted to approve the preliminary design and authorize the submission of the grant application.
Right. So for those that are not familiar, this isn't the first time this is going to appear before town meeting. And I think that's the point I was trying to make, that we originally had some discussion earlier on, and I'm glad you clarified that back in 2016,
Yep.
To really kind of get the approval from town meeting to be able to support this, because we didn't want to submit an application without knowing that there was support for the project moving forward.
And I think that was required by the grant application
Yes.
too, to show that you had town
Interest,
support.
right.
Yeah.
Right. That's to minimize the possibility of a select group of people pushing a project through without having the approval of the town.
Right.
And the town did. The town approved it and said, sure, go ahead and put the grant in.
And that's very similar to other like school projects with the MSBA. They always are looking to make sure that those folks that have a voting right are supporting this to move this project forward, because obviously there's a lot of work and manpower that goes into these applications and the process. So they want to make sure that before they submit and I guess allocate funding for it, that,
Right.
that a community is serious about moving forward with the building project. Can you just talk a little bit about the cost of the new library, the amount of the state grant that's coming in, and what exactly are we getting for that total construction estimated? Again, I know it's estimated construction cost.
Right. Well, as I indicated earlier, the grant is $7.3 million. When we looked at this project back in 2019, the total cost of the project had risen from when we first applied. And one of the unfortunate situations with the grant program is that when you go in with your proposal or your request, even though you try to anticipate cost increases and changes in supply,
Right.
you put in escalation fees, but what's happened since 2019 has been crazy. So I think back in 2019 we had a price tag of 15 million,
15.
$15 million.
15.8, I want to say.
Yeah, 15.8. And since then that's gone up to just under $25 million,
Right.
which is a hefty price, but it is consistent with what we're seeing with building costs all across the Commonwealth.
Right.
There's a number of libraries that are facing the same situation as Seekonk, where they put a grant application in, they were awarded a grant in anticipation of that being close to 50% of the actual building cost, and it's ended up being reduced because there isn't an escalation in the grant number that comes from the state.
And that's not just unique to libraries. That's building.
Oh, the building, yes.
That's public
In
construction
general.
across,
Yeah.
even
Everywhere.
private construction, but with public construction, it's a higher rate than what we're
Right.
seeing in the private sector. However, we were just doing the South End Fire Station. It's roughly a $2 to $3 million project prior to COVID. And now we're seeing $650 per square foot for a very simple building. and that's driving the price from $2 to $3 million to $4 to $5 million just on a small project.
Sure.
And at the scale that you're talking about, going from 15 to 25 million is not. It's a significant increase, but it's something that other communities are facing with their libraries as well.
Correct. Correct. So the 25 million would be reduced by the grant, obviously. We do have plans for a capital campaign. The Library Trust, which is a separate arm from the trustees, has plans in place to look for additional monies. They've targeted $1 million to raise to defray costs. And the amount that would be funded by the town is the difference between those two. 25 minus 8 would give you $17 million. And that's staggering, but it's reality. And if, again, you hate to say this, but if we wait, it's only going to go up. Costs are going to go down. And the need of the community is the need of the community. We have to address that need. That's really what's driving this thing.
How close is the campaign, the funding, the campaign for the $1 million? How close are you to that target?
We haven't started actively approaching people because you don't want to go out and say, give me the money if you don't have the commitment to having the thing actually built. It makes it difficult. But I believe, based upon what they had done in the past and because they have a very conservative fiscal approach, I think we're probably at 35 to 40% in terms of that number.
I would say
within the trust's accounts.
That's great.
Okay. I don't know, do you have anything that you want to add to that, or?
The only additional money we would see would be from LEED, when we obtained LEED certification. That's an additional $256,000 that will be awarded to us. That's, from what I've been told by our architect and OPM, current building codes pretty much require that in public construction.
Right.
So depending on the level of LEED certification we get, we can count on an additional $256,000. So.
Right. So what can the taxpayers expect from a building project costing $24 million? What are they going to get?
Well, if you try to break it down to where it's very simple terms, we're looking at approximately for $100,000 in valuation of your home, an approximate $1 a week, I think it comes out to be $48 or $49 a year increase in your taxes. So the average household in Seekonk is approximately $350,000. You'd be talking about $3.25 per week to build a new library. Now, of course, if you have a bigger house, but the thought is that you'd be able to afford a bigger increase. But it's not like it's going to be, $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000 more in a year. So it's palatable no matter how you look at it, I think.
Right. So I think to you, Kate, in terms of services that are being provided, what's the expectations for this new building?
So increased programming, increased community gathering space. I mentioned earlier the quiet study rooms. We send people to Attleboro right now for that because they have quiet study rooms and we don't. We do get that question frequently. And just space for our community to, whether it's work or relax or have their community organizations meeting. We have one meeting room and it's in constant use.
Right.
So when you walk in our library, we're pretty much, there's the meeting room on your right, children's room on your left. There's no space in our children's room for families to really sit and read together. We've reconfigured it over the past couple of years, but it kind of is what it is space-wise. Right. The rest of it's one big box. And so when you have an adult who's trying to do something on a laptop and you have tutors and students 20 feet away, and then you get the middle schoolers after school, it's a lively place.
It is.
Yes.
I will tell you, you gave us the opportunity, and I mean us, the Board of Selectmen and myself, the opportunity to do a tour and really kind of talk about what the needs were, or the driving needs behind the building. And I think a lot of us walked away surprised. I mean, I'm in there all the time, so I get to see it. But it's amazing to see what your staff and your team has done to be creative with the space that we have and the limitations that you are faced with. And I think the space that the public isn't privy to, how congested that is, and the multi-use, and the conference room serves as somebody's desk and workspace, and and how much leakage is coming from the roof, and the impacts of having to put tarps over equipment, things of that nature. I think some of that stuff is not really seen by the general public, but
no, we try to provide the space to the public.
Right.
And, the staff spaces are cramped.
Can we talk a little bit about the building project itself? So for those that are not familiar with the project, there are multiple phases of the building project. So in terms of what's being presented, is this a conceptual design? Is there going to be change if this is approved? Can we reduce, square footage to reduce the cost? Or are we already in what I would call construction documents ready to go out to bid if this is awarded? Where are we in the phase?
So we're not at construction documents. It's preliminary design. The square footage cannot be reduced because that's what was applied for in the grant application. So the MBLC, the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners, is fairly strict that you can't reduce square footage if they approved a certain
square footage.
And the reason being for that, as costs increase, it's a normal reaction for people to say, can we cut this to reduce cost? Unfortunately, no, we can't reduce square footage. We can make changes in design, moving one area to another and flipping that. But if you reduce square footage, you forfeit the grant. So we would forfeit the $7.3 million.
Great.
And I think, I think the thing to understand, the driving force behind that is the community's conclusion regarding the needs that they want to have met. And because of those needs that were identified by community members, that yielded then an adequate number of square feet to meet those needs. By changing the amount of square footage, what you're saying is, we don't believe what you told us. And we don't want to do that. We don't have the right to do that because this is what the community gave us. This is what they said they wanted, and we're simply trying to meet what community members have requested.
I also think it's important to note, I've spoken with some of the folks who were on the facility study committee, and they were committed to not overbuilding for the town. They understood the needs of the town, but they also understood the limit of what the town would pay for.
Right.
And I think it's important to note that in 2000, when this process was gone through, the design then was for a 33,000 square foot building. This proposed design is just under 25,000, I want to say. So the facility study committee really did their due diligence in taking the data that was learned in 2000, listening to the community, and not proposing something that was too large for the community, but something that would not only meet the current need that's not being met, but work into the future for the community.
Right, which is always important when you're doing a building project, looking at future needs. I mean, obviously we've got short-term needs, but things that you can't predict is a future need. So you want to have that flexibility. And just, I know there's a QR code on the special town meeting warrant article that will link folks to the library's website that gives an overview, so a video of what the library looks like, and then some additional statistics. And I think when you start to look at that building project, you can see that you're meeting a lot of needs that you currently are not able to do in the current footprint that we have. So I think it's important to discuss while we're on the topic of footprint, is if we can talk basically about the footprint that currently exists. Some folks are aware that there is a capped landfill under there, so we were really kind of restricted in terms of the footprint that was provided. So I believe we're using the exact same footprint and we're just building up. Is that correct?
Yes, because you can't go back really from the building at all. The landfill cap is there. So it is. And when we say on the existing footprint, to be clear, it's a complete demolition, dig out, new foundation, because as you know, we have a foundation issue. One of the corners, I forget what you call it, but it's cracked. And that storage room, when you walk in, the floor dips down. But no, existing footprint, and then building up. That's the only way we can attain the needed square footage.
So we're, in terms of a building, if folks are driving by, we're going to be looking at a similar size building, but a taller building. That's where you're going to really
Yes.
capture a lot of your
Correct.
square footage.
Exactly.
Correct.
You were able to provide a presentation to the board when you were requesting the special town meeting, and you did your due diligence in terms of talking about what the cost would be for a completely new construction project, a renovation, and then I think the other one was just maybe a rehab, a slight rehab of the building
Some
itself.
Just repairs.
Yeah.
Repairs.
The first number was like just under 3 million, I think.
Yeah.
Was just repairing things that you can visually see are wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
In terms of what exactly you looked at, and maybe if you have the dollar amounts off the top of your head, you can kind of speak to, so that, you know, the cost of a brand new facility renovation, and then obviously if you can talk a little bit about what those three different scenarios would do in terms of meeting the demands that you see in the facility, library facility committee has put together in terms of future demands.
So we worked with DPW for the repair figures, and so it was things like HVAC. Our HVAC system is 25 years old or more, and DPW tweaks it a lot for us, and but it's at end of life, so that needs to be repaired. Our siding is a mess. There's no getting around that. We will need some rooftop repair. Carpeting throughout our public bathrooms are awful. Our cleaning company comes and cleans them, but they smell continually. Our meeting room does not have up-to-date presentation system software, so we got a quote for that to be able to upgrade that because the community deserves that. The staff room upgrade. Our staff room is
Right.
I don't want my staff to see some of the other things in town, like, because you can't open a kitchen cabinet without sawdust coming down, so.
And it's tight quarters in there.
It is
Yeah.
tight quarters in there.
So the repairs, I think we indicated, and you mentioned it earlier, Sean, was approximately $3 million to just do repairs.
Right, and that does not include that foundation corner footing.
Correct.
That's the unknown figure that
That's
we
a
don't
big
have.
unknown.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I actually have the slide here if you want to speak to it. I'm sorry.
sure,
I don't know
Yeah.
who wants to.
thank you.
Yeah,
But I
it
think the square footage too is also an important piece, because I think the repair and then the renovations do not add any square footage, so you're still not meeting the demands that you currently have now,
correct.
Right.
and future demands that you anticipate.
That's right. That's right. You're still going to have a refurbed 1967 Yugo. You know, it's going to run well. It's going to be nice, but it's not going to have any of the requirements you need to support your family, which is now grown, or to provide them with the safety features they need to back up and have a camera, or. So we're going to have a renovated building that really isn't going to be able to provide us with anything that people really need.
Right.
And that cost, that's the renovation, that's the renovation as opposed to repair. The renovation cost, I believe we estimated, and we didn't estimate it. We used our architects and our OPM to get comparable costs throughout the Commonwealth. Because the one thing we didn't want to do was just throw a number out there and say, well, what are you basing that on? We're basing it upon a square footage. We're basing upon, as you referenced earlier with the fire, a square foot cost. And it came out close to $12 million to do a renovation.
12.5, yeah.
$12.5 million to do a renovation. So if you do the math with a renovation, and it's the same square footage, as you said,
Right.
you're doing 12.5 for a renovation, which is totally out of pocket with nothing coming from the state, and you're still not going to have the needs met that have been identified.
Right.
So yes, it's an opportunity. Yes, it's an alternative. We looked at it, but fiscally, it doesn't make sense. And I think one of the things that I tried to get across at the Board of Selectmen meeting is the library trustees are elected officials, similar to the Board of Selectmen. We have a fiduciary responsibility just like they do, just like the Finance Committee does, just like you do. We're not looking to spend a lot of money. We want to do this as efficiently as possible. But we're faced with needs that have been identified, which we feel are important to meet because of the changing nature of our world and because of the impact that those changes have on the community.
So the three options: repair, which is really just a makeover.
Yep.
That's coming in just under $3 million, same square footage. A renovation, roughly $12.5 million.
Yep.
Still does not give you
No, that
additional square footage to meet the demands that we have.
Right. That would just be the repairs plus trying to reconfigure the space to get something, but there's no way in the same square footage you can.
And then new construction, and this is taking into consideration the grant, is going to be $17 million, right?
Right.
$24 million total, $25 million total, $7.3 million from the grant, so a $17.2 million cost to the town.
Correct.
If that's going forward. In terms of that, and you kind of alluded to this, the other two options, the repair and the renovation, we cannot use the state grant for those options.
Not at all.
No.
Nope.
So the state grant is specifically for a new construction.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
In terms of, and we were talking a little bit about this offline before we started, and the fact that libraries and a lot of people truly don't appreciate the fact that they constantly have to reinvent themselves. And from a business model standpoint, they do a phenomenal job of doing that, right? When you start looking at technology and everything that's coming before us, a lot of people are asking, why do we need a library? You know, I can do all this at home, but you've constantly had to do that. Reinventing yourselves, whether it's at 3D printers, leasing, DVDs, ebooks, things of those natures.
We heard that when ebooks came out, that would be the death of libraries,
right?
And
yet libraries
not the case.
and yet libraries continue to succeed, and,
Right.
and there seems to be, even a growing number of communities that are building new libraries in this environment. So
Right.
we're not unique in the sense that there are libraries who, number one, are outdated, but there are folks that are actually starting to support this. How do you feel going forward in terms of the money that's going to be spent here, being able to continuously reinvent? Like, what new programs do you feel that you'll be able to add that will benefit the community?
I think one of the biggest things that we could do that we're not doing right now is serve job seekers. So that's tough to do without spaces to do that, whether to provide training or to provide interview space like I alluded to before. We hear that a lot.
Right.
Like, I need to do a virtual interview, my home is noisy, can I have a space? Like, we don't have a space for you to have.
Right.
And the same thing actually with, this is interesting, this has started since the pandemic, college interviews. Kids needing space for their
Right.
college interviews that are now virtual. So providing that sort of service is something, we have programs sporadically for job seekers, but to be able to really offer that to the community would be great, particularly in these economic times.
Right.
It's challenging.
So
for
with
folks.
COVID, are you seeing more folks coming in that might be working from home, just number one, either trying to use additional resources at the library or even just offering up, a different environment as opposed to always being home? Are you seeing more folks coming in for that particular area or no?
I wouldn't say we see more because we've always had that. We've
Okay.
always had people coming to the library to do that. I think what the difference that we do see is we've reduced the amount of our public computers because people are coming in with their own devices, so our Wi-Fi usage has gone up. And it's really interesting. We just actually subscribed to a new service to give us an accurate statistic on our Wi-Fi usage because it's something we have to report to the state, and Comcast is not super forthcoming with that. So,
Right.
but it's interesting to really see. I just got my first report, and the usage is, I think, in September, and it wasn't even a full month because we started, I think, the second week in September. 416 unique users and like 1,300 Wi-Fi sessions alone.
Right.
So that's,
Significant.
it is
Yeah,
significant.
it
So
is
people are looking for spaces to come and do their work.
So I just have a couple more financial questions, really trying to target those questions in terms of the impact to the
Right.
taxpayers. So you've kind of touched base on it a little bit earlier on, but if you can just kind of elaborate it a little bit more. What is the impact to the taxpayers for this $24 million bond?
$24 million bond, that obviously will be reduced as the funds are received from the state. And just so people understand that, when we would begin the project, I believe it's 20%. Then after you have finished drawings, you get another 20%, and it goes out then for the next 3 to 5 years. So the funds would all be received over that period, which would reduce the amount of the total bonding. $336,000, $337,000 is the average home valuation in Seekonk, and I think we said that number was 200 and, give me the number again, 250 for the total tax bill. I know we said it was $100 per, or
so
close to 100 for.
It comes out to roughly, if we're looking at a valuation of 100,000, the yearly impact on the tax bill would be $45.
Okay.
So just if we round it up,
so
it's
that's 125 for $300,000 home.
Correct.
Right. So that's the impact to the average taxpayer.
And then the question, I know there's been questions out there whether or not the town has to bond the entire amount. And yes, we need to borrow for the entire $24 million, but what's really going to be paid is the $17.3 million that's coming in from, that's net of
that, right.
The grant.
And I think the thing is, going back to the comment about repair, renovate, and build, the difference between the renovation project and the new build project on a net cost basis is $12 million for the renovate and $17 for the build a brand new one. Plus, you pick up almost 10,000 square feet in doing it.
Right.
So for 10,000 square feet, it's going to cost you $5 million.
Right.
Because we can't afford to do nothing. So never say that anything's positive, but somewhere in the future there would be a renovation that would be required simply to have usable space within town.
Sure.
So let me pose this question to you. There are some folks out there who are saying, I don't utilize the library. Why should I have to pay for it? Can you talk about maybe some potential benefits that are greater than just the library for the town by having a new library? Does it generate additional potential for a meals tax? Hopefully, getting people to the library and then hopefully having them kind of drive and go to local restaurants and get them out of their houses. Are there any additional benefits for those folks who say they don't utilize the library?
Well, I think the folks who don't use the library are fortunate, and they tend to forget that sometimes their neighbor is not so fortunate,
right.
Because we certainly see usage of the library. Libraries are seen as economic anchors in communities. And so to your point, yes, if it's a destination that people want to come to, whether it's a program we have, or we're so beautifully situated with the conservation, on the conservation land and the trails, and it's a draw. And it's also a draw to bring residents to communities. I know one of the top things people look at besides schools and public safety is a library.
Right.
Because do you want to live in a town without one?
Right.
Right.
So.
The growth, I think, that's occurred in town obviously has been fueled by a number of factors. Low taxes being one of them, good schools being another. But the library has a great reputation both in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and in Rhode Island. And people who want to move to the community, that's one of the things they consider, as Kate said.
Now, another question I think a lot of folks are asking, and I'm sure you've seen this either on social media or just in talking with folks, why do we need a modern library like that you're presenting? Why is it so modern?
Modern.
Oh, the look of it?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's important to remind people that, again, it's preliminary design, but some of that is fueled by what the MBLC will and won't approve. So in Massachusetts, there's a move for green buildings. And so in order to make a building green, part of the design process is windows, because windows bring natural light into a building. And so it reduces your energy costs. And for instance, in the proposed design, there are windows situated overlooking the meadows, which I think is beautiful. But the point of it, and the point of the interior construction, is to bring that natural light into the building to reduce your energy costs. And then energy efficient windows, and I've been assured by our architect that windows have come a long way, particularly since the windows we have, which
Right,
are
right.
original. But that is the whole point, to reduce energy and to be a green building. And there are other things incorporated into the design that will
Great.
do that.
So all those windows, because we've heard, floor to ceiling windows, the energy impacts and trying to heat the building. So we're not concerned about that. They've actually looked into, obviously, which they typically do,
Right.
the cost to run that building and operate the building from an efficiency standpoint.
Right.
Right.
It's interesting because Grafton has a fairly new library. They opened, I want to say, last year or the year before. About the same size community as Seekonk. I think it's about 18,000. And they have some of that design incorporated into that. So.
Great. So last question before I get into library statistics is, there seems to be some discussion whether or not the library building project will impact either a DPW building project that's coming on board or even a South End fire station. And I just want to take the opportunity just to really kind of hopefully clarify that the projects are not mutually exclusive, meaning that if we have the library, we can't have the other projects. That's not to say that the debate obviously does not continue to exist as to whether or not taxpayers can afford multiple projects. But if we have a library, we can also have a DPW and a South End fire station if the taxpayers feel that they can afford it, and from a personal standpoint. All three projects would have to go to town meeting, similar to this project, for support. So there's not really a competitiveness in terms of one or the other. So I just want to get that out there because I know there's some folks that are talking about that. In terms of library statistics, and I know you've provided this before, can you just tell us what you have for statistics in terms of usage, how many folks are going there? And then also as a follow-up question, can you talk to the statements that are being made that it's mostly out of town residents or even out of state residents who are visiting the Seekonk Library versus town residents?
Well, I can start with the last one because statistically we get monthly statistical reports from our network, which is sales, and less than 5% of our circulation is out-of-state residents. And out-of-state residents do pay an annual fee. It's $75, I think now it's gone up to. So that's just not true, that it's mostly Rhode Island residents using. I know I've heard people say, oh, I go by the parking lot and it's all full of Rhode Island resident cars. Well, some of our staff live in Rhode Island, so it's their cars. And people using the meadows and the conservation trails, because
Right.
Gamino Pond is often full, and no one is checking where they're coming from. So
Right.
But so the statistics that you're gaining from sales is showing 5% are out of state or out of
less than 5% are out-of-state residents.
Right.
And
just to-
75% of our, 75% of our cardholders are Seekonk residents.
Okay.
So
Right. I was just going to add that we're not giving a geography lesson here, but we are a border community.
We are.
People come from Rhode Island to shop. They come from Rhode Island to go to the restaurants. They come from Rhode Island to use the library. And of all of those three that I just mentioned, only the library is getting money from the people that goes into the town's budget. We don't see any other than the restaurant tax. We don't see that type of return on the other visits.
Right.
So we've tried to take that into account and make sure that we charge properly so that the town and the network sales, which Kate's going to get into next, isn't being put out.
And that was my next question. That was perfect segue there. Can you speak to the sales network for those that are not familiar with sales?
Sure. So sales is the library network we belong to. It's a network of, I want to say, 70 libraries in 39 communities in southeastern Massachusetts. And it's basically resource sharing. So rather than Seekonk residents being limited to what's in the Seekonk library, it extends their reach into not only other libraries in the region, but throughout the Commonwealth. We are a net borrower. So in Seekonk, we borrow much more than we lend. So we have a pretty heavy user base. And I believe it's we borrow about 46% more items than we lend out.
Really?
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
So how do we compare statistically to other communities, comparable communities in terms of libraries?
In terms of size? Or
I think patrons, just I guess general statistics you would probably try to compare to other communities.
I honestly haven't looked at number of patrons compared to what other libraries have. I can tell you that historically, since I've been in Seekonk, which is 6 years, 2 years as director, Seekonk is one of the highest circulating libraries, meaning in our checkouts. And that goes back to our heavy borrower base that we have. So we're typically first, second, or third in circulation in the network.
Wow,
and
impressive.
That's something to be proud of, and I think dispels the myth that people in Seekonk don't use their library, because they do.
Right. The other thing that I'd add about the network, it provides us with an extension, as is evidenced by the fact that we do borrow so heavily from other libraries in the network. It's essentially giving you a larger pool of resources to utilize, both within the network, but then also within the Commonwealth,
Sure.
because you can get books, periodicals, research articles from the western part of the state if they're not available here. And that's because of the fantastic library system that exists within the Commonwealth, of which Sales is one. I don't know if there are 6 or 7 regional.
I've lost count. I think there are 6 at this point.
Because this is something that happens all throughout the Commonwealth, just to make sure that we can maximize resources and not increase operating costs by having to do it all ourselves. I know one of the things I do, I always do my searches for books online, and I may go to the library to pick them up, I may use ebooks, but the point is, one of the things that's offered by Sales is the fact that if you are seeking a book that they don't have, they say, hey, do you want us to recommend it? And so
Sure.
2 months ago, I said, sure. I figured
Recommend
I'd see it in
order.
about 6 or 7 months. And 3 weeks later, it was in the collection, and I was able to borrow it. So it really opens up a lot of other avenues that I don't think are available.
Great. So I just want to address the cafe. Can we? That seems to be
Well,
a
it's about lunchtime, I think.
hot topic conversation now in the
So-
community in terms of the cafe that's located at the library. So
This is an interesting urban legend that has developed in Seekonk. There has never been a cafe in the design plans at all. I don't even know how that started. My guess would be that in a preliminary design or a rendering, I'm not even sure. I'm not sure how this started, but there was cafe-style seating in the lobby, meaning you walk in the lobby, there's a pub height table, so if you come in with a coffee, you can set it down, finish it, and then go wherever you're going in the library. I, as a library director, would not want to have to be in charge of a library cafe. I am not trained, I'm not a barista. So, yeah, that's a...
No cafe.
So it's a myth. So there is.
No
so we're going to
cafe.
dispel. We're going to dispel the myth.
Right.
Never cafe.
There is. We're going to be the Mythbusters. There's no cafe.
Right,
So
that's
there's,
good.
Yeah, I like that. Every once in a while, I get
Every
good.
once in a while, you can be a Mythbuster.
So no cafe, no food, no drinks.
No.
But the
No,
design does
right.
allow for the rooftop on the lower level that's open. You're utilizing that space, right? So taking full advantage of all the square footage that you have, allowing folks to go outside and either use their computers, sit down, do some work, and I believe that opens up.
It's basically, yeah, there's part
Just
of...
an extension.
Right, so if you're on the second floor, part of the first floor roof is there, and so it sort of made sense to
Utilize that space.
it's like a rooftop patio. It's nothing special.
Whether we put tables or chairs out there, it's still going to be there.
It's still gonna be there.
Right.
In the design, you want to make it functional, so you added the ability to go in and out, which overlooks the meadows, right?
It
so
does,
it's
yes.
correct. A great location.
And I think outdoor space after COVID is not a bad thing.
No, I would agree. That's highly sought after. So, and then my final question for you folks is, and I've seen this on social media. There have been some statements about school libraries being upgraded recently. So if you could just maybe potentially talk about how that impacts the library, does it impact the library, and whether or not that discussion should really be included in the discussion of a new library.
I'm not sure what specific upgrades are being talked about. I'm in favor of libraries being upgraded in any way, shape, or form, obviously. I think it's apples and oranges because school libraries are not open evenings, they're not open weekends, they're not open in the summer. And they do a great job of serving their community, which is the age group that they serve, but they don't serve adults in the community.
Right.
They don't serve business owners in the community. They don't serve the seniors in the community. So I'm not sure what the illusion is to.
No, and I would agree with you. I think there's a set time. Teachers tend to leave shortly after school, around 3:30, or even 2:30 when school lets out. So the library is open on the weekends. It's open late at night. So I don't think there's a competing interest there. But I just want to get that out there. I know I saw that one statement on social media. Just wanted to take the opportunity to address it for the folks at home and watching the program. So
I think that the movement toward improving libraries helps all libraries because, as Kate said, there's limited hours for the students to utilize the libraries. First of all, they're only going in on specific periods. What it does, it allows them to begin their research or begin their inspection of a particular topic, but then they can take that easily to to the public library and just continue it afterwards. And I think the point that you made about being open as much as we are, not to have that opportunity would hinder the students more than having better school libraries hinder us. So I think we work in tandem with the school libraries very, very well.
Right. So I think I covered a lot of the questions. Is there anything that you folks specifically want to address or correct? Any information that I might have missed?
Well, I think the one thing that I would ask the community members to do, and we're only talking a week and a half here, if you have questions, call the library, send an email, stop in, text. We're willing to answer any question whatsoever, primarily to avoid any further confusion moving forward about things. It was a community project. Nothing's being hidden. There was complete transparency in everything that was done. There was approval at town levels on everything that happened. I think we're just trying to bring a town project to culmination. And that's the thing. It's not a library project. It's a town project that's going to benefit the entire town.
Great. I appreciate it. Thank you for coming in and joining me with this. I think it was a fruitful conversation.
Yep.
Hopefully it was beneficial to the viewers at home. In terms of asking any questions, is there a particular person we should direct the questions to? Is it to the chairman, to the director?
Either.
Either one. Yeah.
Okay.
There's contact points on the website for everybody.
All right, so we'll get both your information on right after
Sure.
this episode, so folks watching this program, they have that information. And
Good thought.
we look forward to seeing everybody on October 24th at 7 p.m. at the Seekonk High School. Just as a reminder, again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to the library or my office. The town warrant has a QR code, so if you want to just take your phone and click a picture there, it will take you right to the link, which I'm sure the statistics will be there. There'll be a short video just showing you the proposed conceptual library, so folks have an opportunity to view that. We all look forward to seeing everybody on the 24th. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Sean.